So my name is Hernberg, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Strelka, for the invitation to Moscow. I will talk today to you about recent transformations in Helsinki's urban landscapes and in the transforming urban culture and citizens' activism and new kind of active role of communities in Helsinki, and about what is the relation between this new activism to the governing and planning of cities, and what could be the role of designers and architects in this process. I run a small company called Urban Dream Management, which is basically myself. So I'm a freelancer, and I always collaborate with different professionals depending on the project. And I've been working both for the public sector and for private clients. Here are some examples of what I have been doing in the recent years. I've been involving in a lot of reuse of leftover spaces or spaces where the original function or use has ended, and it usually involves then activating different kinds of users in the reuse process of the spaces. So I'm going to talk to you about this Kalia project later on in my lecture. I'm also going to talk to you about Helsinki Beyond Dreams, which is this book, and some of the activities that are presented here. I've been involved also in different kinds of participatory design projects in the built environment, so I really try to kind of bring the aspect of involving users and different stakeholders in built projects, which is not really always the case in Finland. And I will, in the end of my lecture, I will talk to you about recent examples of how design has been entering the government of both municipal and national governing bodies, and the new emerging roles of designer in this context. So, but first, a few words of what really inspires me in cities. Change is something that is, it is in every city, and it's a natural feature of cities. And I think change is what is making cities often inspiring. In Helsinki today we have a lot of changing landscapes. This photo is from one of the harbors called Kalia. It used to be one of the main harbors of Helsinki that are very close to the urban city centers. And then the city actually relocated these harbors to the eastern suburbs in order to make land for residential construction. And in the meantime, these changing landscapes are somehow breathing energy to the city, because they have become sort of more zones where people can behave differently and have a bit more freedom in using their urban space. So that has been very inspiring for me. And also in this process, the role of designer is changing. I don't consider myself a designer of fixed buildings or fixed urban spaces, but rather as an agent or facilitator of change, and it always involves operating with large numbers of different people. So these two quotes from John Takara and Herbert Simon describe really well the role that I see very relevant for designers and hopefully architects as well. John Takara said, designers are having to evolve from being the individual authors of objects or buildings to being the facilitators of change among large groups of people. And then Herbert Simon said that everyone actually designs. Everyone who devises courses of action aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. So it's not always anymore the case of making decisions and designs about something that will be fixed and standing there forever, but it's about operating some kind of a more organic thing that is always changing and evolving. So, some examples of how the urban culture has been transforming in Helsinki. This photo is from the same Kalasatama harbor that I showed you in this empty photo earlier. It was a bicycle event actually 5 years ago in this harbor, and this guy in the middle, Timo Santala, he has been one of the most active kind of urban activists in Helsinki, initiating a lot of new ideas and events. Actually, the time of 2011 and 12, when I was doing this book, it was really a time when there was a boom of new kinds of events and a new atmosphere of the citizens, because I would really say that Helsinki had felt even 10 years ago a rather stagnant and quiet place where people felt maybe much more controlled than today, and somehow also connected to the rise of social media and people traveling abroad and getting inspiration and ideas. There was a breakthrough of this new active and communal spirit of people in Helsinki. This event called Restaurant Day is one of the most famous in this development. Have any of you heard of Restaurant Day? Okay, great. So it was a food festival that started 5 years ago. It was an idea of a group of friends who were a little bit tired of the restaurant culture in Helsinki, which was not so diverse, and it was in the public knowledge that it's really very difficult to open a restaurant in Helsinki. You need to deal with a lot of bureaucracy and invest a lot in all kinds of technical equipment that are necessary, and there's a very strict health regulations and so on. And this group of friends had an idea that why don't we just turn this upside down and invite anybody to put up a restaurant anywhere for one day. It could be in a park or in their homes or in a garage or on the street even. Let's see what happens. Basically, this idea was not illegal because there are all kinds of fairs or kindergarten events where people can sell their homemade baked stuff and so on. So if you do it temporarily, it is not illegal. But in people's mindset, people thought that could this really be something that we can actually do? And in the first event, there were maybe 40 small restaurants on the streets of Helsinki. And this festival was organized 4 times a year, and every time it grew larger, and in a couple of years there was thousands of restaurants all over the world. So they built an internet platform that was really easy to use, that you could just list your restaurant there and do it. And what was really interesting, that this small event, it not only grew international, but it changed people's attitudes about what can you do in the public space. And it also changed the health authorities' attitude in a way that instead of banning this event, they actually became really welcoming and published instructions for people on their website, telling people that you should keep cold food cold and warm food warm and so on, to prevent any kind of food poisoning and so on. So after 5 years, this became so successful that actually the group of activists that were running this event, they grew tired, and last spring they announced that Restaurant Day is over. You can actually have Restaurant Day any day, anywhere you want, but this four times a year festival doesn't exist anymore, at least in Finland. Another phenomenon that has grown really popular in Helsinki is urban gardening. Since 2009, first activists were putting up this doesn't really work, their gardens by a railroad where there was some leftover land. And then they actually also then tested the vegetables that were grown there in a laboratory to find out whether it is safe to grow food in this urban environment. And after slowly this idea became really, really popular, and it has been adopted by communities all around in Helsinki, both in people's courtyards, but in different locations in the city that are kind of unused or left over. And this photo is actually from my own office. I have my office in an old harbor building by the sea, and there's a 120-meter unused terrace. So we put this garden to grow some vegetables and flowers. This photo is from an event called Kalia Block Party. There has been really a growing spirit of neighborhood awareness and pride over the neighborhood where you live in. And people, neighbors and friends have started these block parties that are really organized by volunteers. They have started from a small group of friends, and then different people have come to help with all kinds of arrangements. And this Kalia block party has really grown into a huge festival. Not all of them are like this, but this really shows what can happen when people are just active and know their way to really make their dreams a reality. Many of these new events are about food, because food is something that really brings people together. But in Finland, eating outside is not, I mean, of course people go to restaurants, but a lot of time people just eat in their homes as well. So these events really try to bring people to eat outside and to connect the eating into a much more social phenomenon. And this event called Dinner Under the Helsinki Sky is also organized twice a year in June on a Helsinki day on the 12th of June. The organizers put a really, really long table on this Esplanade street, which is in one of the most central streets in Helsinki. So it is blocked from cars, and from 6 p.m. to the rest of the night, people can bring their own food, and there are different groups who don't know each other sitting side by side, and it's a really interesting event. Of course, many of these events are popular among people between 20 to 40 years old, but also in neighborhoods that are not so central, there's much more variety in people's ages, and the different kinds of young volunteers have also tried to create things for elderly people and to kind of grow this idea of community events into such that can be enjoyed by all ages of people. And this event called Social Beat is a group of people who go to elderly homes and organize different nice things for the seniors that live in these homes. And this was a coffee party in the spirit of 1920s, so the people could dress up in the 1920s style, and there was a professional photographer taking these fancy portraits in the old style. And another example called Cleaning Day. This was, of course, inspired by Restaurant Day, of the idea of having this daily festivals organized twice or 4 times a year. And this is the festival where the city becomes a flea market twice a year. So people can bring their clothes from their basements and to sell them in parks or in a location that they choose. And this has also grown quite so popular that it might be difficult to get your stuff actually sold because there are so many flea markets all around the city. But this has been also interesting in relation to the city government, because normally if you would like to do this kind of thing, you would have to apply for permission from the building authorities. But the organizers of this event have made a deal with the authorities so that during this cleaning day festival, people can just notify of their own flea market stall on the website, and that's enough. So the authorities have really become to show kind of very welcoming attitude towards these events, and make their best to make it easier. Of course, they have many other things on their agenda than helping people in their cleaning day, but they have been welcoming to these kinds of ideas. But also, the new kind of community spirit in Helsinki is not only about events or some kind of temporary things, but people are also building blocks of flats together with their friends. So this kind of joint building venture projects have started to become popular, and also the city is in favor of these. So in these new areas where residential production is happening, city wants to reserve plots of land for these groups of people who want to organize the construction of the whole block themselves. And also legislation has been changed to make it easier to do this kind of projects. So this rather long list of examples is something that I had called Everyman's urbanism. This word Everyman's urbanism is the kind of translation from a concept of everyman's rights, which is a Nordic concept. Everyman's right applies in Finland and other Nordic countries when you move in the nature, so you can pick berries or mushrooms, even if it's a private land owned by somebody else, as long as you don't go to people's gardens. I don't know if you have similar kind of concept in Russia. But now I would say that people are really adopting their right to the urban space in a way that it makes it everyman's urbanism. And you could also talk about the democracy of making. There is a lot of talk about democracy these days in many countries, and even in Finland many people are tired of politics. But this kind of direct action and direct way of doing something very concrete in your neighborhood can be seen as a form of very direct form of democracy, instead of, or not instead, but complementing the more traditional form of representative democracy. And perhaps some of the power of decision making in the very kind of local level can be given more towards the people who live in the city. As a designer and architect, I had a very traditional education in architecture, making designs for buildings and town plans, but I was interested also in how people use their environments that are designed for them or not designed for them. And I've been thinking over many years, following these examples, what could be the kind of role of designer and architect in these processes, and how design can really support this kind of citizen participation and engagement. So instead of regulating, can planning and administration be seen as something that creates opportunities? Of course, we also need regulations, but in some cases this is a shift of mindset, perhaps. And instead of seeing design of something that has a goal in a something fixed, we can think about designing a platform that enables different things to happen. So, of course, the city itself, I see it as a platform for many things, and the changing city especially. So I'm going to quickly show you examples of this Kalasatama temporary project, where I was involved in 2009 to 2011. This is the same place that was in one of the first images of the lecture, the empty harbor. You can see the central areas of Helsinki in here, and this Kalia district is where the massive block party was happening. So this Kalasatama harbor is really close to all the main areas of Helsinki, and this whole area of different kinds of industrial harbors was demolished, as well as this from Jätkäsaari in 2008. And there is massive residential construction going on in these places. But in Kalasatama it was realized that the actual new building projects will take so long, it can take even 30 years before the whole area is finished, that we can actually do something in between, and we can organize temporary projects in the harbor. So the Kalasatama temporary project was established. And I was at the time working at this office called Part Architects. We were 3 people working on this case for 2 years. And the idea of this project was really to give people opportunities to use their creativity and to come to the harbor and organize activities themselves, not so much of doing things for the people, but activating and giving people a little push. At the time when this project started in 2009, we didn't have all these examples of restaurant day or these block parties, but we could see small signs of emerging active spirit, and we knew some active groups, so we had a kind of hunch that something could happen if we really try to help people to get active. We started this project by organizing a brunch in the harbor. This was in connection to Flow Festival, which is the most popular urban festival in Helsinki in August, and we invited people to have brunch cooked by a famous chef called Antto Melasniemi, and in exchange they could give us their ideas what they would like to do in this harbor. And this was really actually the first time for most of the people to visit this place, because it used to be behind closed gates. So it was an experience just to come to this empty harbor itself. And after this we started contacting these different urban groups that we knew were active in Helsinki, and planning with them and also organizing different things just to help those people to fulfill their ideas. For example, we bought some old marine containers because there were not any indoor spaces that could be used in the harbor, and we organized water supply for urban farmers so that they could water their farms, but basically these projects were then done by the volunteers themselves. And during the 2 years, and even now, even after, this really slowly there started happening a lot of things in the harbor. First, we organized, or we asked some artists to organize urban art projects that were a kind of invitation for people to come and walk around and visit the harbor and get inspired. And then there were other people who contacted us and who wanted to do something there. And then it was a snowball effect of many different things, and here is a selection of them. There was actually a quite high-end restaurant where the food was cooked on these solar cookers under the sun. So in the Finnish summer you could actually not always know whether you could actually have food. When I tried it, it was sunny, and when I was cycling to Kalasatama, on the way the clouds came, and then the food was kind of semi-raw because it was not properly cooked, but it was part of the experience. There was a skate park that was built by the skaters themselves. There was a lot of different kinds of events, concerts, poetry readings, punk concerts, theater events, whatever you can imagine. And this is a cycle-in film screening on one very warm summer night. So as these events were kind of rolling, we were coordinating it, but they were also rolling on their own weight, and not all the events that were happening there were kind of designed or planned. This project called Sompasauna became quite famous because it was an illegal sauna built by people from scrap wood. And the idea was that it's open for anybody who just wants to collect some wood from the area and heat the sauna. But the people didn't apply for building permission. So, and when the authorities found out of this, they didn't know who was behind it. They didn't know with whom they could negotiate. So the authorities demolished the sauna. And of course, because it had become really popular, people were furious, and there was a lot of public debate about how can they do this, and you know, this is outrageous. But actually, this debate then led into quite fruitful conversation between the activists who had built the sauna and the officials. And now the activists have actually rented this small land for a very kind of very small sum of money from the city, and the sauna is then running again. I think there is actually 2 saunas there at the moment. So I think in Finland most of the activists are very responsible, and they want to make sure that they have considered all the rules and applied for all the permits. But some people also have the attitude that maybe you should do first and apologize afterwards. And sometimes this also works. But a bit more about the role of the public sector. I think even 5 years ago, a lot of people complained that there's too much bureaucracy in Helsinki and in Finland in general. And when these people have been, when the volunteers have been organizing these events that I showed you, there's a lot of work behind it that you could not see. Some of it is also because of the bureaucracy. And I think a lot has also changed in the public government in Finland and in Helsinki in the last 5 years. But there is a long way to go still. But the authorities have an attitude that they want to make things easier, but those are very slow processes. But design has an interesting new role in this. And actually there have been different kind of programs incorporating designers to the public sector to help in different ways. And there are 3 aspects that I would like to mention, because many of you might think of design as designing of objects or graphic design, fashion design or something like that. But we talk more about design as capabilities and methodologies. And one of them is collaboration. Design has many methodologies for involving the users in the process, finding out about people's needs and desires, and also facilitating negotiations between various different stakeholders. So collaboration in many different ways is often a very important part of this design for public sector. And experiments are one interesting thing, because prototyping is always a part of design. And experimenting is actually a very quick and cheap way to start new things and try out whether they work or not, and then adjust after the experience. It's very much in contrast to the logic of the public sector, at least in Finland, because they are used to planning for a very, very long time. And even you have to invest quite a lot of money even in the planning, and in the end you may not know if the result actually works. So the public sector has also started adopting this idea of experimental culture. They are even experimenting on a new kind of social welfare system soon in Finland. And also the idea of turning the top-down or bottom-up processes 90 degrees. So in this picture, this is what used to be top and this is what used to be down. So instead of having these one-way processes, you could actually have an iterative cycle where you have strategies and frameworks that still have some kind of flexibility, but they provide long-term targets and broad context, both to city planning or the government. And then you could have small-scale projects and experiments where you learn from, and you get practical experience from a specific context. And that, again, then you can adjust your long-term strategy based on this. So you can have both long-term vision, but agility to work on the here and now. Those are the three aspects that I think where designers can be very helpful. So can someone tell how much time I have left? Because I don't have the time. Okay, good. So I'm just going to quickly show you some of the latest developments in this design for the public sector. I was personally actually working in this design exchange program that I will tell you about, that was started by this organization called Sitra in Finland. In this design exchange program, 4 designers were placed in 4 different public sector organizations, 2 ministries and 2 municipalities, to work as a kind of change agent for 1 year. And after this experience, another design program was started, which was called Design Driven City, and that was then a program for cities. There were 4 cities involved, and there were 3 designers working for these cities for 2 years. And after this, there will be a program called Helsinki Lab, where there will be designers working in Helsinki city for 3 years. So this development is really going forward through this kind of short-term programs, but it looks like that is the way to get funding and so on. Because it's a new idea that not all the people yet understand. But after I worked in this design exchange program, I was together with some design researchers at the Aalto University. We started a course called Design for Governments, because we saw that there is a demand for this kind of new role of designers, but there is not yet any education for that. So we started a study program, and that was also starting as a pilot, but now it runs as a permanent course. But a couple of words about this. So after working a long time on my own, on private projects, I took a kind of personal guinea pig test and jumped into the Ministry of the Environment to work as a civil servant for 1 year. And it was part of this program where 4 different designers were in different organizations. And I had many different kinds of roles. It was both about building this new way of thinking inside the ministry, being in meetings and trying to offer alternative viewpoints and trying to break people's common ways of thinking inside the ministry. But a large part of it was about working with the citizens and trying to involve citizens in different ways in the governmental processes, such as legislation or something else. And within this program, we started a project called Vacant Spaces, because that was my kind of expertise area. And we started a project investigating on the topic of vacant buildings and why there are so many buildings lying vacant and how could we make better use of them. But a large part of this project was also about involving a lot of stakeholders in this process and trying to overcome many kinds of contradictions related to the processes of the vacant spaces and their reuse. So we organized all kinds of workshops with ministry people, with business people, with people, startup business people, with the users of the space, and trying to involve as many as possible, as many kind of stakeholder groups as possible into the meetings. And we try to make those participatory meetings in a kind of new setting, not the same kind as the typical ministry workshops. So we always brought them to empty buildings that really changed already the atmosphere of the workshop. But really after this, the experience was quite positive in the Ministry of the Environment. Of course, you could not really achieve very much in 1 year as one person, but we could really see that this is something that has to continue. So we started this course called Design for Government, and this has also been really successful during the 3 years that it has now been running. So we work always with Finnish ministries. They are our clients, so we always have 1, 2, or 3 ministries per year, and they provide the course different kinds of challenges from the ministry level. And we have students from different disciplines, from architecture, design, business, engineering, and social sciences. And we provide those students different tools to attack the challenges provided by the ministries. So far, there have been 3 courses and 17 different projects, and really, I would say almost 300 different civil servants participating as well. But just quickly about the approaches that we have on the course. One, and maybe the most important of them, is empathic design, or you could call it user-centered, human-centered design. So we provide the students tools on how to study the different stakeholders' needs and desires relevant to the problems, and really go to the field to see people's daily lives related to the problem, which is something that the civil servants don't often have the possibility to do. The other aspect is systemic thinking, systems thinking. So we try to cover the big picture and really analyze the problem, and to see whether we are actually trying to solve the right problem, or whether we could see the solution somewhere else in this big systems map. And we really try to include both the big picture and then the concrete, very concrete solution. So the third aspect is then behavioral insight. And because ministries are making laws and different kind of policy tools that are targeted to normal people who are living their daily lives, and often, sometimes these tools just don't work because there has not been enough behavioral thinking in the preparation of these tools. So this understanding people's behavior is really important. Last year we had projects with the Ministry of Transport and Communication and the Ministry of Environment about reducing electronic waste, motivating kind of low energy use in housing companies, and then helping different kind of bottom-up mobility solutions in the rural areas of Finland. So we had really interesting projects. And the response from the ministries has been really enthusiastic. So we have heard many civil servants telling us that they would actually also like to take the similar kind of course, which is now only for students. So we will see if in the future it would be a professional course also for civil servants, who knows. And our website is on the dfg/course.al.fi if you want to have more information. But now I want to thank you for listening. There was quite a lot of stuff, but I would be really interested in hearing also your feedback and comments on the context of Moscow and Russia, which is quite unfamiliar for me. So.
Дорогие друзья, если у вас есть вопросы, как вы помните, мы разыгрываем книги, то поднимайте руки.
Добрый вечер, спасибо. Вот вы были просто гражданином активным в Хельсинки живя, а были дизайнером и были чиновником. Скажите, когда образуется какое-то желание у народа или у дизайнера, или же у правительства, как это все взаимодействует в том плане, приветствует ли правительство народ и насколько оно идет ему навстречу? Или же люди очень стараются выделить, выпросить у правительства средства на эти мероприятия? Как происходит эта коммуникация между ними? Спасибо.
So you were asking about the attitude from the government towards these active projects and what kind of correspondence is there between the activists and the government. Well, usually it of course happens in the form of different, when you apply for permissions or something like that. Those are usually the most kind of important bureaucratic processes that people have to do. And those processes have been tried to make easier these days. For example, in Helsinki, the public municipality of Helsinki is trying to provide a new service where you wouldn't have to go to every department of the city to apply for like 10 different permits. Instead, you could go just to one location and do it there. And different kinds of online services are being made to help this process. But still, it can be a pain in the ass if you are doing it for the first time and if you don't know. So often it's a question about whom you know, whom you contact. It can be a question of really the person's attitude whom you contact in the municipality. So in a way, in a general way, I would say that the attitude of the Helsinki municipality, for example, towards these initiatives is really good and welcoming, but that is really on the top level of the city. But when you go to the middle management, when you have civil servants that are quite busy in their jobs, doing their responsibilities and tasks, then sometimes it can be overwhelming for them, to help the activists and so on. So it really depends what kind of person you happen to find. But for example, one of the deputy mayors of Helsinki, who is in charge of all the built stuff in Helsinki, he is on Facebook and on social media all the time, and if people encounter any kind of problem, they just tag his name and he replies like in 2 minutes, and it's quite incredible. So there are these civil servants who are really kind of have a passion to help people.
Terve, kiitos ja tervetuloa. I'm really interested about Satama port, Kalia Satama.
Yes.
And I'm interested how you communicate with owner of the place and how you get permission to gather there.
Okay.
Because it's industrial place and it's expensive. Government probably or owner can do something there, and how you get it. Thank you.
Thanks. Yes, I didn't explain it properly. This was in the background of the project. It used to be an industrial port, but it was demolished and the harbor functions were relocated to another place in the eastern Helsinki. And there was large-scale residential and mixed-use development planned by the city of Helsinki. So I'm not sure if the land was actually owned by the port of Helsinki or the city of Helsinki, but it was waiting for the new construction. So it was together with the city planning office and different departments of Helsinki municipality that it was decided that we would do this project, and we were actually working as consultant for the city of Helsinki. So it was not our like volunteer project, but we were really asked by the city to coordinate this temporary use of the harbor. And in the beginning, it was the idea was that we would use this kind of art budget, because in Finland you have always 1 or 2% of a built project budget allocated to art. And we hoped that we could use this budget for a kind of to see this temporary use of the space as environmental art, but this did not happen because it was also in the kind of private building companies' interests to have permanent art in their buildings rather than some kind of grassroots events.
Good evening. I have not a question. It's maybe better to say I would like to ask you for a piece of advice. I'm from Lithuania, from Vilnius, and we have some group of architects, of urban designers who are working the similar way as you do. Mm-hmm. So they are trying to change the environment, like involving people who actually live in it, and they have failed. Because it was a situation like they tried to change the living conditions in old Soviet blocks, and they asked people to join them in processes of urbanization of it, and they were expected that they will like their idea. They wanted to build inside of those almost abandoned blocks. They wanted to build more greenery, wanted to build more space for children, spaces for barbecue and so on. But actually what they saw that people want more space for parking and so on. And they saw that what they wanted to get from this communication with people, with inhabitants of this place, fell. So I wanted to ask, what to do in this situation? Then you see that all your good ideas doesn't work there. Do you need to show those people that they are wrong, or you need to follow their wishes to make this parking space for them and to fill everything with concrete as it was before?
Thank you. Well, it's hard to give proper advice to you just by hearing this example, but you're right that this participation in different kind of urban projects is not always easy, and I think one of the main problems or mistakes that often is done, at least in Finland, is that participation happens too late in the process, when the designer already has decided what they want to do, and then somehow they just want to make it look like people have a right to say something, but in the end it's not like that. So I would say that I don't know if it was done like this in your project or in your friend's project, but I would really try to invite people as early as possible to investigate the different possibilities, and then of course it's a matter of choosing or planning quite carefully what kind of groups you invite, so that you don't have only the parking people. Maybe I don't know if did the children also want parking spaces and so on. So try to involve very heterogeneous groups of people. I think in Finland often when it's the case of participatory workshops for municipal urban planning, the civil servants are often worried that they will only have people who want to complain and who have a very loud voice. And of course, often the people who want to complain are sometimes the most active. But then you have to work to inspire other kinds of maybe more fruitful ideas to come. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Mikhail. I'm an urban planner and also a civil activist. And I'm a founder of some civil movement in Tula, which is some small Russian city. And you know, my experience of civil activism is not that successful as far as collaboration with authorities is concerned. So in Russia, activist movements can sometimes be considered as a threat to authorities, and that's why in some cases activists cannot count on such kind of support. And I would like to ask you, based on your experience, what conditions would you consider basic for activist movements to succeed and to be successful and to function normally?
Well, it's really. I was interested to hear about how it is here, and I would say that, for example, in Helsinki, many of these activist projects are rather friendly, and they are not that much about trying to protest against something, but rather to kind of make life enjoyable and do positive things for the community and for the environment. So these kind of projects have been welcomed very well, but I don't know what kind of activist projects, like any. Yeah, it's very unfortunate if the climate is such, but I would say that in Finland it's quite, the climate for this kind of activism is rather friendly, maybe because the threshold for having a conversation between the public sector and the government is quite low, so they are there really to serve people, and you can have a conversation between the authorities. So I guess that is a very fruitful ground to do these projects.
Спасибо за интересную очень лекцию. Два вопроса коротких. Первое. Какая доля горожан принимала участие?
Sorry, can you start again?
I have two questions. The first is, what is the percentage of city population which participated in the events you described? And the second question is, how did you measure the effectiveness of your work? So when you could say, yes, the community is activated enough, or not, it is not active enough, we should do something else. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I don't have statistics. I mean, activism or urban culture is such a broad phenomenon that I don't think any of those people who have organized these events, I don't know if they have measured the number of people who have, participated. So I really don't know of the percentage. But of course, yeah, but I can't really answer to that. And to the measurement tools, until now I haven't had this kind of quantitative measurements in these projects. It's a process, ongoing process where we always learn something, so you can measure success in so many different ways. But I mean, it's also both about success in involving people and what is their experience, but also because this is a fairly new approach to urban planning or public sector design, so it's always a learning process also within the planners and authorities and the designers. So yeah, I don't know, maybe it would be necessary to measure in some ways, but it has been more quantitative, I would say, qualitative, I would say.
Hello,
I would like to say thank you for this interesting conversation. And actually, one of my questions was already asked, but I have a feedback from Moscow. Now we have a huge project called My Moscow, which is redeveloping all the streets, all the main streets in the city center, and many people are disagreeing with all the decisions, and I think it's just like mother and children relationships, when mother said, I know better and do better, and it is better in the end. So my question will be different, and I would like to ask you about I think one of our main problems, courtyards in huge residential areas, because when developer build something in the area, they want just profit, as always, and they build huge multi-story residential buildings without any infrastructure between these houses, and there's only parkings, and residents of these buildings have nothing to do. And so if they want to change something, with what should they start?
Well, is it totally a private project, or doesn't the municipality have any role in building the infrastructure and the services in these areas, or is it just private companies?
The second question. You mean about the second question?
Yeah.
About I think my question is how to start by ourselves, because actually government do not care much, because it's not so central areas. They are always far from city centers. So yes, if some of communities in these houses wants to change something in their everyday lives, moms want to walk with their children and so on, with what instruments should they start?
I don't know if I understand your question correctly, but I guess one way is to build a group of neighbors and people to just organize some very friendly activity in the public space, invite other neighbors to discuss how we could improve this area, and maybe invite some of the representatives of the building company to join this event and answer people's questions. Or I would try to do something in a very friendly way, but in a way that it involves people and kind of builds enough mass of people for the so that the responsible company or city or whoever sees that there is enough kind of mass of people who want some kind of change. But also maybe it's a question of whether the people are tenants or whether they own these houses where they live in, and if they can somehow try to influence the market or the public image of the builder who doesn't provide them the necessary services. The social media is very powerful these days and so on. It's quite, I don't know, because your culture might be different from mine, so I don't, it's a bit dangerous to give you advice on how, making a Facebook campaign to ruin the builder's image, but, do something that tries to convey the message to a large group of people. Yeah.
К сожалению, время на вопросы подошло к концу, и, наверное, сейчас стоит определить лучшие вопросы. So, Hella, I think it's time for choosing the best questions. What do you think? Time for choosing the best questions.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
Okay. I think all the questions were really good, but I think I would choose the question about the measurements, and then the one about the activists who and the authorities whose attitude is unfriendly.